Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with Dylan Thuras, and we are talking about it's not just a podcast, it's so much more about Atlas Obscura. Hey Dylan, thanks for speaking with me today.
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure. It's great to talk to you. And where are you? Yeah, I mean, I know you're in the UK, but where in the UK are you?
I'm in Nottinghamshire, if that makes any sense to you. Yep.
Yes. Cool. Yeah.
About 20 minutes drive away from Sherwood Forest.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I really love traveling through the UK. I was in Scotland with my kids a couple summers ago, and hopefully back soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Scotland is lovely. We'll come to the history of Atlas Obscura first. I mean, in a while. I mean, number one, not meaning to be jokey, but it's interesting because I didn't know where I would find you for the chat. I thought you could be anywhere really, because you do love to travel and go all over the place.
It's true. It's true. Although my life looks a lot more like a normal middle-aged dad than maybe you might think from the outside. I live in the Hudson Valley, just like a couple hours north of New York City.
Yep.
I do a number of trips throughout the year, trips to go film some video stuff, some sort of boring work trips, business meeting type stuff. But like most of the time, I'm at home buying groceries, biking to work, like living a very unexciting life. Much to my great content, honestly. I love travel, but there is a point you pass at which it can become a burden rather than a joy. And I try to be careful about sort of balancing the different parts of my life.
And well, except for those moments when you include your family in these expeditions, because I've heard episodes where you've taken your family to these places as well.
Yeah, and you know, my wife also loves travel. We met in college, but we started dating after college, and then we really got to know each other in a very serious way. I think we already knew each other pretty well, but we spent a year living in Budapest in Hungary when we were in our mid-20s, and we traveled all over Eastern Europe, and we wrote a blog about our travels and kind of taught ourselves how to write, how to take photos. The internet was still early enough where you could just kind of like do something interesting and you'd find an audience. This is like 2007. And yeah, she's a big traveler too. So we both still love traveling. Our kids are becoming good travelers themselves. They're just getting old enough to really be able to do some bigger, more kind of adventurous trips. So I'm excited to do that as a family.
But there's no chance of taking the family to the Arctic Circle then.
It's not out of the question. It's not. I mean, honestly, those Arctic Circle things, you could do an overland thing. That's way harder. That's like you got to be kind of up for something serious there. So probably not that. But most of the Arctic Circle stuff is like cruises. I mean, they're like smallish 120 person cruises. You're on the boat, you go and you do hikes during the day. That's actually that's a very doable thing in a weird way. It's less crazy than you might expect.
Yeah, I mean, some people. One of the subjects that you had not so recently, that I listened to recently on Atlas Obscura, that some people might think is a bit strange, but I don't. It really touched me? I really enjoyed it. Was Sputnik Fest? Is it called?
Which episode? We've done a couple of Sputnik related things.
The one where you've got the where you've got a part of Sputnik stuck in the middle of the road, and
Oh,
then they have a
in
festival
Wisconsin.
around it.
Yeah,
Some
yeah, in
concept there.
Wisconsin. Yeah, 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 in my neck of the woods.
Mantorwalk, is it?
Yes, yeah, 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 exactly. Yeah, I mean, I love stuff like that. I grew up in the Midwest. I think of America as a country filled with my vacation as a kid were all road trips, around the Midwest. I mean, it's hard for people to understand how big that area of the country is, but boy, you could easily do 7 hours of driving in a day and only go from Minnesota to South Dakota. And so we did a lot of that kind of travel when I was a kid, and that also meant a lot of kind of quirky roadside attraction stuff. And so I have a real soft spot for that kind of travel. And yeah, the Sputnik thing is great. I mean, this was, I think, Sputnik number 5. There were actually a series of Sputniks.
Yep.
And yeah, and one of them broke up in the atmosphere and a chunk of it landed in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. And so they still have the spot marked and they throw a celebration and it's like a whole fun thing. I've never been to the celebration, but I hope to go one day.
But, I mean, the reason why it's fascinating because you go into real detail in the episode to the fact it's something that people don't know about because it's like one of those incidents where something happens, but it happens at the same time as something else. So in this case, it was happening at the same time as was it the Cuban missile issue at the
I
same
think
time? So it wasn't in the
I
news because of that.
yeah, I believe that's right. I think that's right. It's yeah, what was I just hearing about that was just like this? Oh God. Some crazy thing that happened on September 11th and
Right.
obviously got completely forgotten about. Oh, it'll come to me. Yes. I feel like that's like a whole class of 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 things that happened on the day when something more important happened. It's like a very interesting class of events.
It's almost like anti-synchronicity, really.
Yeah, I guess that's right. I guess that's right.
I do know September 11th, a lot of things in media, like records that came out and films that came out, they sort of like went by the wayside because I mean, for understandable reasons, September the 11th was the thing that was in people's minds all over the world.
Oh, you know what? I just remembered what it was. It was this Los Angeles library fire, which is the largest library fire to like ever happen in the US.
Right.
Happened, I think that day. It's funny. It's one of the wild things about doing both the podcast and just sort of working on Atlas in general is kind of the volume of stuff that 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 we could do. We just think we're on episode of original episodes, not repeats. I think maybe we're just around 600 or something. And then obviously within the Atlas, there's 30,000 or so places. And oh, okay. Sorry. I'm going to correct myself. Yes, a giant library. It was not September 11th. Other things did happen on September 11th. But what I was trying to pull to memory was that on April 29th, 1986, was LA's largest library fire, but it was also Chernobyl. That was the disaster
Yes.
that happened today. So that's why no one remembers hearing about this enormous library fire that would have been headline news all over the country, but everyone was paying attention to Chernobyl. Anyway, point being, we live in an information saturated age. I am an information saturated person, and things come in and fall out of my head in kind of a in constant motion. So I apologize if you bring up an episode and I'm like, wait, okay, which one is that? Usually it comes back to me, but I have to jog my memory.
Right. But I mean, so what is so I'm guessing that the inspiration to be this sort of explorer type person that likes to go out and find new experiences and discover new things, that's just naturally come from your own childhood when you were taking on these experiences with your family.
Yeah, I don't. I think part of it comes from that. I've always been interested and excited about the idea of traveling. I mean, like many people, I took my first big trip between high school and college. I went with a friend, and we did a very kind of classic European tour for about 6 weeks or so. And it's hard to say. I think it's just always really been appealing. I think it's appealing to a lot of people, and I think I'm not some super crazy traveler. Like, I've been to a lot of places, I think comparatively, but of course, in the scheme of things, like, I've met tons of people who have been way more places and done way crazier things than I have or maybe would do. So I think for me, the motivation is often some mix of the excitement of the new and then sort of learning some context about that place. I really like the process of kind of coming to know a place's history or some story about it. So that's always been a big motivator for me, is sort of both going and the learning. I feel like if I just go and then I kind of don't have the context, or I don't kind of really understand what I'm seeing, it doesn't feel like I've actually done that much in a way.
Yeah, because I mean, I find this myself if ever I mean, it's a long time since I've been on holiday abroad, but when I do go to places, I like to actually go there and experience what the place is like in every way possible, in a sense. It's almost inconceivable to me, those sort of people that go on holiday and they just do exactly the same thing in another country and eat the same food and live the same experience in this other country as they do in their own. Yeah, I just don't. Yeah, I'm more the person that likes to go there and find out. Oh, what's this food like? What is this festival like that they have in this area? And as a musician, what is it that they do musically as well? It's getting the whole experience.
Yeah, totally. No, I think what's funny about travel is it is not really a function of distance. Like, we often think about a big trip as going far away, going many thousands of miles away. But fundamentally, travel is just putting yourself into a totally new context. And truthfully, you can kind of do that very close to home. You can do that in a lot of ways in a lot of places. It's Travel's just like a shortcut. It's like a way to kind of force yourself into a highly new context where you have to learn a bunch of new stuff and kind of learn to navigate in new ways. But you know, it's no d you could travel 50 miles from your home and, I don't know, try and teach yourself how to be a blacksmith, and it would have, in a way, a lot of the same qualities of travel. It would be a brand new kind of set of experiences with different cultures and kind of customs, and so in a lot of ways, travel is just it's a very handy shortcut for forcing ourselves into unfamiliar circumstances.
What made you then go from just being this sort of person that enjoys these experiences and doing these things to then starting Atlas Obscura? How did that come about?
So I met my co-founder Josh over the internet. Again, this is kind of in a pre-social media era of the internet. A
Yeah.
lot of blogs, people doing their weird projects. Josh had a weird project, a weird blog he worked on called The Proceedings of the Athanasius Kircher Society. And I thought it was great. And it was similar to a lot of my interests. And so I reached out to Josh and said, hey, he had actually put up a post asking if anyone would help him producing a big event. And so I said, "Hey, I'm free." I was working as a video editor at the time, and yeah, I would love to help. It's funny, we were the same age when he kind of interviewed me and was very serious and said, "I have a lot of candidates." It turns out I was the only person who responded to him, but we immediately we just found kindred spirits in each other. We really the same kinds of stuff made us both light up. And we put on this event, we started talking. I had already planned this move to Hungary. So I was sort of like, hey, I'm going to be gone for a year. We started talking about travel and how really the best travel places were not in most of the guidebooks. There was a great out of print book called Weird Europe, which had a lot of this stuff in it. And so we started talking about creating something that at the time we called the Encyclopedia of Wonder. And and what that would look like and what places would go in it. And so over that year in Hungary, I wrote my own blog with my wife Michelle called Curious Expedition. And Josh and I started working on Atlas. So I helped write the first, I don't know, 300 or 400 entries, traveled around a lot. The Atlas was a little bit heavy in Eastern Europe when we started
Yeah.
because that was where I was at the time. But yeah, just over time it kind of evolved. We knew it was something closer to an art project than a business. We did not really have a business plan. We had a kind of some ideas on a single sheet of paper. We have that sheet of paper. It says like trips, question mark, question mark, question mark. And what's funny is looking back at how many of those things we on the sheet of paper we've ended up doing over the years. But we started it and we launched it in summer of 2009. I had since moved back to the States and we found our audience pretty quickly. We found that there were other people like us who were excited about these places, who had things they wanted to add. It's always been a user generated site at its heart. It's still people sending in suggestions saying, hey, there is this great place, this crazy museum, this outsider art project. And so we would take those and we would edit them and turn them around. And it very quickly became full-time work to basically just keep up the site. And so then it was like, all right, we've got our audience. The thing is working. Now we have to figure out how to make it, how to make some money so that it can pay us so that we are not broke and destitute and evicted from our apartment. So that was sort of the next period was for the first year or so. It was really kind of like a one-man band. Josh had left New York City. I was still there. We were sort of working remotely on stuff. I was doing all the editing and slowly we kind of figured out how to make a little money from online advertising and whatnot to get a small staff of, we had ended up that time it was about 6 people, 7 people, some of them like half time. But we could kind of cobble it together. It was hard. It was hard to kind of make payroll and figure it out. And you're sort of doing it all for the first time. And then eventually around 2012, 2013, we've been running for a while. We've been going for 4 years or so, even a little longer, with just sort of bootstrapping everything. And eventually we decided we should raise some money because we were never able to quite get enough money in the bank to hire a couple of really good salespeople to get more money. So we were always kind of in this, we felt like we were a little bit on a treadmill. And so we decided to see if we could raise some like investment money and we did. And that's sort of been the story since. We've been growing as a business kind of since then, doing new things, right? Our trips business, we run about 100 international group trips a year. We got the podcast, we got the books. The first book came out in 2016. That was definitely like a big moment for us. We started working on that back in 2011. So it took a while to get it sort of fully baked, but it was well received when it came out. That's been the kind of story. I've been doing this for 15 years. It's been the kind of work of my adult life.
So that is the book that we're talking about. There you go. Atlas Obscura.
And that's a first edition too. I can tell because they re-released it in 2018, but it looks different.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's fascinating because you've done it exactly like a world atlas is, because it is basically you got the different sections, all the different continents, all the different places in the world, and
Yeah.
then inside that bit you've got then the different bits about that country. So it's like a big main section is this country, and then you go into Nepal and get, like, for instance, you get all these little things that you've discovered in Nepal, and then all these other, like Pakistan, you've got a section for that, and all these things that you find in Pakistan. So it's great. So basically, it's easy to use, and you're never at a loss for something because you go into the book and you will always find something that's one of those moments where you're like, oh, that's fascinating, and you can't stop reading because then once you've found something, you're like, oh, what about I'll just flick to another page and you'll find something else, and you will always find something fascinating.
Thanks for saying that, Marv. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, that was the hope. So I'm glad that's how you found it.
I mean, it's one of those books that I love where it's just full of information. I really like those books. I do it a lot with. I've got like a book by somebody who did what is it, podcasted a book about Christmas films, for instance. And it's nice to just dip. It's one of those books that you can just dip into if you fancy a bit of a get away for 5 minutes. And Atlas Obscura is almost a bit of a. This might sound silly in some ways. It's like you don't need to leave your own living room to travel, essentially. You can travel from your own armchair.
No, and it's to be honest, it's a great bathroom book. I people have said that to me sort of just feeling like maybe I'll be insulted, but no, it's kind of the perfect thing to, yeah, pick up and page through, and you got a couple of minutes sitting there. Yeah, it is you could read it front to back,
You can
but it's not really the vast majority of books, it's not really how it was designed. It's very much, yeah, exactly. I love these kinds of books when I was growing up. The kind of there was a series from Time that was all about kind of the mysteries of the universe, and it was like a whole mix of real stuff and woo woo kind of nonsense. But they were great. They were great, and so I am also just a fan of these kinds of informationally dense, huge spanning. Every kid loves a Guinness Book of World Records book
yes.
because
Yeah.
it's sort of a sampling of the world's weirdness, and there's just something really appealing about that kind of thing.
Yeah, my younger brother James, it used to be a thing where he had to have the latest Guinness Book of Records every year.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, and that Time Life series was called The Mysteries of the Unknown. I don't know if you had it in the UK, but it was just like every book was on a different kind of subject, psychics, whatever, utopian visions. They were just, they're so good. And definitely more kind of goofy and filled with like paranormal stuff than Atlas is, but they have some similarity in the sense that they kind of like explore the world's weirdness in a kind of encyclopedic fashion.
Yeah, it's along the lines of I've said before when I was a kid, one of the things I used to do, I've said before, was I used to go into people's houses and if we go and visit people, for instance, when they go out to make drinks or everybody'd leave the room, I'd go and check the record collection as somebody who loves music. But at the same
Yeah.
time, and I've not said this before, if I ever visited someone's house and they had any of these books, for instance, I mean, the big one over here and probably in other places of the world would probably be the Encyclopedia Britannica, which was enormous. It was multiple volumes. And if you find anything like that, or I find anything like that, or any of
Mm.
these reference books, and they'd leave the room, it's cheeky, really, but I'd make my way to them. I'd spot them straight away, and I'd suddenly pull out a book and just at random, one of the Encyclopedia Britannica books, and I'd just pull them out at random and flip open a page to almost find out something new that I didn't know before.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, totally. I still like doing that same exact kind of thing. Um, yeah.
So when you wrote this first book, then how were the roles? How were the roles divvied out in a sense? Because it's written by yourself, Josh, and then there's Ella Morton.
Mhm.
For those that don't know, so how were the roles done then? Was it just basically all three of you had these different things, all these different experiences that you brought into it, or did you have specific roles in the collation and the writing of the book?
Each of us brought our own specific stuff for sure. And
Yeah,
then it was an interesting process because we were it was always evolving, the process. At the beginning, I did some kind of chose the places, right? I went through what we had currently in the Atlas in
yeah,
2011 when we started and sort of said, okay, I think this is the outline. And I had written a lot of written or edited a lot of those places myself because I was doing so much of that work at the start of Atlas.
yeah.
And so I went and later, but then as we wrote, more stuff got added. So you would have to go and say, actually, never mind, let's add this one or strike that one. And so there was a little
Oh,
bit of a moving target. All these books are in a way. Actually, the one we did about food, Gastro Obscura, was
yeah.
really challenging because restaurants are like mayflies. So you have to be really, they open and disappear within a year. And so we kind of constantly had to be checking to make sure stuff was still there and still open. But and then so there was a process of kind of taking what a lot of stuff that I had written or edited. Um, and then Ella did a lot of the kind of conversion of that stuff into the final book text. There was definitely a bunch of kind of passing back and forth and looking at specific areas where we knew something. But it was a 5-year process. And Ella deserves enormous credit. I mean, she did a ton of work just getting a kind of consistent tone across everything. Because it wasn't always the case with the online atlas that everything kind of sounded the same because different people would sort of do stuff in different kind of style. And then I would edit it or later other people would edit it, but it needed to be kind of brought into a really consistent kind of and very short format. So Ella did a lot of work there, but definitely a group effort.
Okay. 10, maybe 20 years if it was done 20 years beforehand, I've got this image in my head that if you'd have done that then, you'd have had this ring folder,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
probably have these little Polly Pocket things that you just put the information in, and every now and again you're like, "Oh, I've been to this place. Where would that fit?" And you'd open the ring and place it exactly in the area, and I've got this sort of like image of, like I said, 20 years earlier, you might have done it that way.
Yeah, sure. Sure. That would have worked just fine. I think we were using like a Google spreadsheet or something. That's a lot of our books are written first on spreadsheet.
It's amazing how technology can make it so much easier, because that will just automatically, if you've got it set up a specific way, spreadsheet will just automatically place the item where it belongs, I'm guessing.
You'd think it was that easy, but actually a publisher then has to do an enormous amount of work on layout. So once we've got a manuscript,
Yeah.
the manuscript's fine. And yes, you can basically sort of go from spreadsheet to a Word doc. Although what tends to happen is we do the whole outline in spreadsheet. We write the thing in a Google Doc or a Word doc or whatever. You do all your passes, your editing passes that way. Then you've got a finished manuscript. Then that goes to our publisher, which was Workman, and then you do a huge layout process where you're sort of laying out photos. You have to edit stuff because it turns out that it's running over. It's too long for the page layout. So you got to take out, I don't know, 50 words or 100 words or whatever. And so there's this real back and forth, even at that stage, about sort of getting everything kind of like right. And there's a huge photo pass where you're looking at all the images and saying, is this the right image? And these projects all take, I mean, like I said, that project took 5 years. Gastro took 3. Wildlife is about 3. We've gotten a little faster, but I just finished the manuscript for the second kids book, which is coming out in spring of 2025. And yeah, that was a couple of year, 2, 3 year project. They're sort of, it's interesting. The pace of the internet is so fast and the pace of publishing remains measured in years. And I kind of like it. I kind of like having these two very different paced creative processes. The podcast is very fast. It's
Yeah.
very fast. I mean, it's a daily show 4 times a week. And same with our kind of editorial stuff online. And then you have things like video, which is kind of a middle. It's usually measured in months, kind of from pre-production to shooting to post-production. Sometimes even almost a year, depending on the project. And then these books are these kind of multi-year projects where we have stuff planned out to, God, almost 2030. Jeez.
Wow.
Uh, which is weird to have sort of stuff like work. You're like, oh, all right, good. I'll start working on that in 2028 and we'll finish that in 2030. And that's crazy. But I don't know. There's something in a weird way kind of reassuring about it.
In 6 years from now, I'll be doing this.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I'm going to do the video thing very quickly as well. Actually, before that, congratulations on talking about the podcast. That episode that you put out for the eclipse, that was a
Oh,
really quick turnaround.
it was fun. It was kind of an experiment for us. We had never done a sort of a same day episode like that. And so we figured that was a good excuse. Both me and one of our producers, Abby, were going to be down at this eclipse event that we threw in Hot Springs, Arkansas. That was fun. It was really fun. We were able to do some pre-production on it beforehand. So then post eclipse, I ran and handed Abby an SD card with my kind of reactions. And she had been going around getting other attendees' reactions. And so, yeah, we had a lot of fun. I think we've been trying to play more with format and just experiment. I mean, one of the great things about having a show that publishes 4 times a week is you don't have to be super precious. You can try some weird stuff. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But it's like one out of a few hundred episodes you're going to do that year. So it's like you've got the room to play. And so we're really trying to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and when you've got that instant reaction as well, that gives the shows that little bit of something different, excitement almost.
Yeah, I think so. It was felt good. It felt urgent. It felt kind of like immediate. I liked it a lot. It was fun to record, and it was like the eclipse itself. I'd never seen a total solar eclipse before. And it just wasn't like anything else I've ever seen. It really was a singular experience. It felt out of time and space. It felt, I mean, it really was the same experience
Yeah.
that people had 10,000, 20,000 years ago when they were awed by an eclipse, and will be the same experience that people have 10,000 years in the future. It is a kind of, it lives in a cosmic space that's sort of makes everything else feel very small and irrelevant and foolish. And it was awesome. I mean, like genuinely awesome. It was so cool.
There's there's almost like, dare I say this, there's almost a magical feeling to it, or as this sort of exciting, I'll keep with the magical. There's almost a magical feeling when you're there for any sort of eclipse at all. I remember I worked in a clothing factory when we had one in the UK. We had I think that was a total eclipse. And that was amazing because but it's the strangest thing because it was in the middle of the day. So it's bright daylight. And then all of a sudden, it's dark.
Yeah.
And it's just, and I remember I got told off actually by the management because I went out through the fire exit at work to go and view it. When it went dark, I ran outside just to see the outer of the sun that you could still see on the
Yeah.
round
The ring.
the
Yeah.
ring. Yeah, and that was just amazing. And then, yeah, I got into trouble for going outside and stopping working for it, but whatever. It was an experience that
Way worth
you
it.
get to
Totally
enjoy.
worth it. But it has a magical quality. I mean, I think that's something that Josh and I are actually really after in a lot of our work and a lot of what we cover is to try and get people to places or to have experiences that feel mysterious, that feel magical, that really inspire a genuine sense of surprise and wonder. It's hard to find. We live in a very mediated world, right? We sort of experience everything through our screens. It gives us this false sense of having a very broad view of the world. But what it does is that it's actually kind of it flattens and sort of drains what that thing actually is. And if you actually go and experience that place or that thing, or you do it in person, it's a wildly different thing
Yeah.
to watch someone do some crazy leap into a lake than to do it yourself, right? And so I do think that there's the whole project is very much it's an internet project, right, at its heart, but I think it hopes to sort of encourage people to exit to exit the vampire castle, to leave the internet for a minute and go experience some things for themselves.
Sometimes, I mean, the experiences that you have, it's not it doesn't always turn out that that is what you get out of it. For instance, I spoke to you recently about when you were on that ship with that guy, and you were going towards, well, I said the North Pole, but I think I got it wrong when I was talking to you about it. But what I got from that was, in a sense, that it's almost like getting to know that person that you were on that ship with was the experience, because it almost felt like when you were talking to him, it's like he reinvigorated you and you could see the excitement that he got from doing these things, which was palpable to you. You felt that same excitement to him, and it was like almost like two kindred souls, even though you were different ages to each other. that you'd built this relationship with this person, and it felt like to me that that's what you got out of that situation.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, yeah, John,
On yeah,
91 years old, still traveling the world. He had just had a recent tragedy. One of his adult sons, who I think was in his 50s, had died in an accident. And he just, I think we're always looking to people who kind of we can see as someone we would wanna be in the future. When you meet someone in their 80s or 90s who's living a life that you sort of admire, I think there's something really deep and profound there, and you sort of it's very inspiring, it's hopeful. Yeah, and exactly that, a kindred spirit. I mean, exactly. It was like I was like, "Oh god, this is exactly who I wanna be when I'm in my 90s, should I ever make it that far." So, yeah, that's right, and I like people. I like talking to people. I like meeting new people. I like meeting and chatting with strangers. I think for some people, small talk is their hell. For me, it's sort of like it's okay. I don't mind a little small talk because it's an entryway into medium talk and then big talk, whatever.
yeah.
Like it's I like yeah. I think it's just there's a joy to be had and sort of being open to the world and open to people in it.
That's why I do what I do in a way is listening to all these different shows and then checking all these videos out that people put out of different subjects is because I'm naturally interested in trying to find out something. I'm always trying to find something new that I didn't know before, and I get
Yeah.
that from this experience, and then talking to the different people that make or the creators, I get to understand then what it is that interests them, and then I get more interest.
Mm.
Sometimes people's own excitement or interest that they put across in their shows is what pulls me in a sense. It's their
Yes,
excitement over
right.
what they're discussing, and then I think, "Oh, okay, I'm more interested in this now, so what can I learn from this myself?"
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, watching someone who's curious try and satisfy some intellectual itch,
Yep.
some line of questioning is really, really satisfying. I mean, it's the basis of much of YouTube and podcasts yesterday I had a conversation that I just loved. I think the show won't be out for a couple of months, I'm guessing, but with a woman named Nikki Twilley, who's also has a podcast called Gastropod. It's a great show.
Yes.
And she is I love her. I love her work. And she's written this book that's coming out this summer called Frostbite. And it's basically about the cold chain, like mostly about how we move food around this vast artificial Arctic. I mean, it is like almost as big as the Arctic. It is just sort of separated into warehouses across the world and refrigerated trucks and all this stuff. And it's sort of one of these subjects that you're kind of like, yeah, maybe you don't think about that much. But it's definitely my kind of like, I am deeply fascinated by, I guess, what I would call the materiality of the world. I think sometimes we look at our modern world and we think of it just sort of it's both overwhelming and boring simultaneously. It's, okay, whatever. That's just sort of like industrial logistics or something. But no, the way that we were talking about orange juice, for example. So in frozen concentrate orange juice, they take all these oranges and then they strip out every single taste of orange juice, except for sugar, basically frozen sugar water. And then they has a whole other process where they go and they basically have their own recipe for the way they want it to taste. So they take a certain amount of this kind of citrus oil and they take a certain amount of this kind and it's natural. It's all coming from oranges. It would just never exist in an actual orange. There's no version of an orange that would ever taste like what you end up with. But there's this sort of crazy multi-step process becomes whatever Tropicana orange juice and or we were talking about bananas and banana ripening facilities, these
Yeah.
places where bananas are shipped green and then you have to hold them and give them different amounts of ethylene gas and the early facilities were constantly exploding because they were very explosive and dangerous and not to mention that bananas are mildly radioactive so they come into certain ports that are, you have to flag them. These are bananas, so they don't set off the alarms. And in the story of shipping a banana from where it's grown to some New York bodega
Yeah.
is the story of the modern world. And I think that that is like an underappreciated source of amazement and wonder. So I loved talking to Nikki about it because I think she really gets this. She really gets that actually the modern age is just as weird and insane and bizarre as any time we've ever lived in history, and to not get fooled by the fact that it's trucks and shipping containers and cargo ports and industrial facilities. The sheen of boredom is the ruse. Underneath there are the most kind of fascinating processes and systems possible. And so that's an area that I am really fascinated by. There's a writer named Vaclav Smil who does a lot of work on kind of mm, energy systems, large scale industrial processing, how much steel gets made, who makes it where. Again, it all sounds quite boring at first, but the more you dig in, I find myself just utterly kind of entranced. So that's a thing that has gotten me very, very jazzed.
Now that's a good segue into video again. That is a fantastic book, Gastro Obscura. There you go. Okay,
Thanks, Mark.
you can see that. Yep. So, I mean, you two must have really, gelled in a sense because this book seems to me like Nikki would have. I bet Nikki must have a copy of this book because it's fascinating.
Yeah. And Nikki and I have talked before. We know sort of been each other in each other's orbits for the last, gosh, I don't know, 10 years. Because I know her partner Jeff Mana as well. And yeah, we share similar interests. I think Nikki probably does have a copy of Gastro Obscura. And that was a fun book. It was like a little bit of a different area, obviously talking about food histories, in specific unusual ingredients, sometimes specific recipes, or just sort of coming at the world through the lens of food. I mean, in a weird way, place is a very useful, fun lens on the world, but it's one of many. You can kind of pick a subject and work backwards from there. I have someone I'll be interviewing soon, this guy Barry Enderwick, who's great, does a thing called Sandwiches of History. And so his whole thing is about sandwiches of history, all different sandwiches from different time periods, and he makes them and he tries them and he rates them. And in a funny way, you can start with sandwiches and still end up looking at the whole world. There are many frames by which to kind of investigate the world, but if you look deep enough at anything, you end up looking at kind of everything.
So I need to go to him then if I want the best PBJ in the world, do I?
Ah, I think he'll more likely tell you about the peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich that was popular in the 1940s. He's less of a here's how to make a great sandwich and more of mm, the world is seen through its sandwich history.
But I mean, Gastro Obscura, you go all around the places, and it's fascinating because for instance, you've got the mended is it mended teapot soup that's from Afghanistan, is it?
That sounds right. Yeah.
So you go from there, then you've got, I mean, the famous one that I posted recently was was it urine fermented some sort of fish?
Oh, in Iceland or yeah, maybe Greenland, actually, Greenland. Yeah. I mean, one thing that I think was a real theme of that book is some of the stuff people sort of go, this is disgusting. This is some horrifying sounding food. Why would you ever eat that? But what you really realize is the wild ingenuity of people. I mean, most
Yeah.
of human existence was spent figuring out how to find and then preserve whatever calories you could. However, you could drying, salting, pickling, preserving in sugar. Like there are a million different ways, and that includes these like urine preserved fish out of Greenland, and so I don't know that I want to eat it for dinner every night, but it's definitely a fascinating story to learn about. And it helps you understand kind of what it was like to like live and exist in that place at a certain time. It's less of a, I think sometimes people think when you talk about food that everything has to be a recommendation, that it's all kind of like, try this is the best one. But to me, that's kind of, I'm not so interested in that. I'm much more interested in kind of exploring food through its cultural and historical lens. I love food, but there's only so many. This is the best restaurant. This is the best recipe. It's all sort of blends together after a while. I'm much more interested in kind of why does this thing exist? Why did someone choose to make it this way? What is the story behind it?
I mean, I've thought that as well with the history of food. I've thought, why did they discover, for instance, that you can cook something one way and that's okay to eat? But I mean, there must have been some injuries over the years or over the
Yeah,
centuries
yeah, mistake.
because the mistakes where you cook it one way and that won't work and it'll kill you. Like is it
Oh, I'm thinking
the
this when
blowfish
your
or
unpreserved
something?
one is skate, right? It's actually South Korean. That's the
Yeah,
one. That's the when it's preserved in its own urine, right? And then the Icelandic is the fermented shark, which is pretty famous. Yeah, yeah, the blowfish, the puffer fish, which like we had
that's it.
some neurotoxin in it, and like a not like a it wasn't one person that died from eating it. It was like a number of people. Yeah, people. I mean, food is the lens by which we all view the world multiple times a day, every single day. There's been a lot of room for experimentation and over the many millennia of human existence.
Mm. Rest in peace, all those lost souls from eating the wrong food.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what inspired you then to do all these different types of media? What inspired you to start essentially, because this is a show mainly about podcasts, what inspired you then to actually start the podcast?
I I had done some work with NPR a number of years back. I did this road trip series for All Things Considered, and it was really great. It was super fun. We had a I loved kind of the process of producing audio. And one of the things that really attracted me to audio was it lives in this interesting middle space. I started out doing a lot of written work, and I loved writing too. Writing is still one of my first and forever loves. But and then we did a lot of video work. I mean, that's actually what I was doing before Atlas Obscura. Was working as the video editor, and video is great, but it's expensive and it takes a lot of logistics to make it happen. And audio is interesting because you can tell really deep stories on kind of a low on a kind of a small budget. You can do high production values without necessarily having to do all the things you would do on a big video shoot. You can tell these really immersive stories using basically one person's narration tape, some nice sound design, and you can end up with something totally transportive. And so we just sort of had this inkling that it would be a good medium for telling Atlas Obscura stories. I was excited to sort of step into a host function for it. And so we and I think we kind of got in under the wire. Like we managed to get that show approved and make a deal with SiriusXM, like just as the kind of wall was coming down. The kind of podcast industry was really starting to implode a little bit, and it sort of has been, unfortunately, over the last couple of years, just along with sort of media more generally in a way. And so we were lucky to get it in and lucky to sort of, I think, be able to take some of the audience we built in our other mediums, in our newsletter and our social channels, and bring them over to the podcast. And yeah, I feel really fortunate to have been able to get that show kind of up and running and have it find its legs while that was still kind of a doable thing. And I hope to do more. We're working on other podcasts. We've got other shows in the works because I think the daily short format is great for the Atlas, but we'd like to play around with some weekly long format stuff. And we've got a show working on that's more like that. I don't know. I think you'll see more audio work from us over the next few years. We have ambitions to keep to keep going.
I like the medium of audio or audio production to a degree. I mean, probably comes from being a musician, but also within that, like you said, you mentioned like you got the sound in the background, and you got all these elements going in there, and with the best audio to me, like with audio dramas or with documentaries or similar to yourself, is that if you get it right, you can actually you don't need that extra aspect of the visual in a sense because it's being put over in such a way that you can actually picture that as a listener in your head. It's actually letting you use that ability within the listener themselves to picture it exactly as the person who's narrating or the people that are discussing are describing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a very intimate medium. I mean, there is someone in your ear
Yeah,
speaking to you, whispering to you, telling you, painting this picture for you. It's very personal in a way that even, that written stuff and video, I think is not, or less so anyway. And so yeah, there's something kind of I struggle to find a one-to-one comparison. Like, it is a unique format, and it sort of lives. I think you can sort of almost live in this subliminal place with people, because often when you're listening to something, you might be doing something else. Maybe you're on a walk, maybe you're washing the dishes, and it kind of frees some piece of your brain to kind of, it's not demanding your vision. It's not demanding your hands. You're not holding a phone. You're not looking at something. It sort of allows you to kind of enter this slightly dreamy space. And so when I think it's done really well, it can kind of be almost like a dream. Like, it can feel almost sort of like something ethereal. I don't know. It has a power that I think other mediums kind of do not.
absolutely. I mean, the only it doesn't even come close. The only medium I could think of possibly getting close would be the old silent films where you imagine the sounds of what's going on the picture, but even that doesn't come close.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great medium. Yeah.
So from there, you now have, I mean, you now have a brilliant staff to fall back on to create, to record and edit, put the show together, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we have 4 full-time producers on this show, and some kind of sound mixing, sound design help at the serious side. And yeah, no, it's we're lucky to have a kind of a show that a lot of has a lot of people contributing into it. And you hear a bunch of those producers hosting their episodes too. I think with a show as frequent as ours, I'm there plenty, but I think it's nice sometimes for the listener to get a break and hear someone else's voice, and also for the producer to get a chance to step into the host role. I think it's like an important part for both sides.
I'm guessing that when those producers, all those other people that work on Atlas Obscura, when they do their shows, I'm guessing that you then turn into the fascinated or the listener yourself that's
I
interested in finding out what they're talking about.
I do. Occasionally, there are shows that haven't really touched. Like, someone else has done the production, they've edited it. I didn't necessarily get involved in editing the script. I mean, I do that fairly often, but and then I get to listen to a show on the podcast just as a listener, and that is very fun. And I'm often just delighted to hear what people put together.
All right, I'm going to very quickly go into a question that somebody sent in. Sean from Review It Yourself said he's put best place visited, but maybe best or a favorite or a place that you visited that stands out for you specifically as in a experience.
Yeah, I mean, I have a handful of places that I hold very dear. One of them is a place in Wisconsin I went to as a kid called the House on the Rock. I cite it often when asked this question, but it's this enormous kind of outsider art project. It has a whale fighting a squid the size of the Statue of Liberty inside this house. I went there when I was around 12, and it's the kind of place that it just can't really be explained. It is truly a singular place in the world. There's nothing else like it. And you go and it takes 5 hours to walk through the whole space. But it has all this mythology built up about it, about this one guy who built it all or bought it all, who was wildly rich, who wanted to be an architect for Frank Lloyd Wright. And Frank Lloyd Wright told him he wouldn't hire him to build a cheese crate or chicken coops. Chicken coops. So the whole thing's kind of this architectural revenge story. Almost all of that is utter BS, but it adds a certain fun sheen to the thing. What it actually was almost an artist collective before they had a name for it.
Yeah.
Before they certainly wasn't what they were calling themselves, but it was a bunch of people who knew how to build weird, interesting stuff and who thought, okay, let's make a great attraction. Let's make a great kind of roadside stop. And so that's a place that I just love. On a early trip with Josh for Atlas Obscura, we did a video series across South America, and we went to Peru to a place called the Quechua-Chaca, or the last Incan bridge. And one, it is sort of, I guess it satisfies whatever childhood Indiana Jones itch you have. It's a swinging rope bridge above a river. It feels slightly sketchy to go across. It's kind of in the process of likely collapsing. At least it was when we were there. And so that in and of itself is quite sort of fun. But the thing that makes it amazing and why it was sort of in the process of collapsing is that it's a bridge that gets rebuilt each year. It's woven from grass. The entire bridge is a rope bridge woven from this kind of straw-like material that grows in the area. And each year, the 4 towns come together and they cut down the bridge and they do this 2-week process of basically reweaving this bridge. And they've been doing this. These towns have been doing this since the Incan Empire. This bridge is a piece of Incan infrastructure that has been remade each year for hundreds and hundreds of years, and is basically exactly the same as it was pre-Columbian contact. It is this surviving piece of Incan rule, was part of this enormous road network that served the Incan Empire in much the way the Roman network served the Roman Empire. They had runners, tax collectors who would travel these roads, who would make sure that these bridges were being maintained by punishment of death. Actually, if you didn't maintain the bridge, it was a big deal. It was not good. And so we know so much less about that empire than we do the Romans because we don't have these kind of written records, but it was a similar sort of scale and even, I would say, ultimately ambition. I think the Incan Empire was this kind of great, grand, sprawling period of history before it all sort of collapsed into nothing or not much, into little. But the bridge remains.
Wow, it's fascinating. Wow. I mean, there must be those sort of experiences then, where you've been to those places and you've got some first-hand information that was never known before you went there, other than to those locals.
Sometimes, occasionally, I think we do really break new stuff. So 2 examples that I'll give that I hold that really make me happy. One is the root bridges of Cherrapunji, India. Someone entered this into the site. Honestly, we'd only been up and running for 4 months. And someone wrote in and entry basically read, I run this Airbnb, or and it wasn't an Airbnb, it was just a B&B. I run a bed and breakfast in Cherrapunji, India, this very wet region in northeastern India. And there are these things here that nobody knows about. And there are these living root bridges. These bridges grown from the roots of 2 Ficus elastica trees. And they're disappearing. There's no tourism to them. People aren't taking care of them. They're being drained for essentially their kind of latex, rubbery sap. And it's a real shame because they're these treasures of the world. And at the time, there was nothing about these online. There was almost no information. And we eventually managed to find out what we could. There were some references in some very old books. We did find someone who'd taken some photos of these things, and we put out the entry. And over the last 10 more now, 12 years, 13 years, what's happened is these things are amazing. And so the interest in them, as people saw photos of them, has spread. They ended up eventually in one of the BBC like Human Planet documentaries. But it's meant a growing tourism industry, sustainable tourism industry around these bridges. The government has realized they've got something valuable here, and so there's efforts to preserve them. There's efforts to make new ones, because the same people who built these bridges, the Kasi tribe, still live in this region and are still kind of the caretakers of the region. It's quite a wild, underdeveloped area. And they're planning this big route across all of these living root bridges. And it just, to me, that is such a wonderful story. I mean, we're all familiar with stories of places being destroyed by over tourism. And it's a real thing. Venice in high season is an unpleasant place to be. But I have seen, and there's a real flip side of this, which is that there are a lot of places, whether they're someone's amazing museum or their outsider art project or something as incredible as the living root bridges, that basically die in silence. They die because there just isn't anyone there to support them and argue for their importance and that they should be preserved, or that people might want to come and actually see these things, and then they disappear quietly. And that's a real tragedy. I mean, there's a whole list of places I've watched sort of slowly disappear and get closed or destroyed or demolished over the years. And I hope that one of the things that Atlas does, besides getting people out to some of these interesting places, is help those places survive, to give them enough interest and enough dollars in tourism to help them just exist and stay in the world. And so I feel like that's a real important mission of Atlas Obscura. And I'm always whenever we hear from someone who runs one of these places, runs one of the small museums, or is the artist behind some project, and says that we've been able to send them people and it's helped them stick around, it's a really gratifying moment for me.
I love that. I love that. That's one of that's something that's come out of it that's positive. It makes me think of it's like a flip flop thing where you've got the negative side to something and you've got the positive side to something. And I saw that with just going off on a tangent, I saw that with the lockdown situation where, yeah, it was bad for a lot of businesses and a lot of tourism in some places. But on the other hand, you've got these bits where, did you catch the footage of, was it Venice, where because there was no tourism there during the lockdown, suddenly you had wildlife appearing on the water in
Some of
Venice.
those were doctored. I can't remember if the Venice one was real or fake. I know some of
Okay.
these were like, it became like a whole meme thing where people were like, but I think you may be right. I think there may have been dolphins back in the river. I think that was a real one. Yes. Yeah, yeah. I also think people learned how to travel in a different way during that period. People stayed closer to home. They weren't. Yeah. Yes, that's right. It was two dolphins in the canals of
Yeah.
Venice. In 2021. People learned that you didn't necessarily have to get on a plane to go have some amazing travel experience. People suddenly said, "Oh, I've always meant to go to this state park or local preserve, and I've just never quite made it there. It's only an hour and a half away." And they would drive out and they'd be like, "Oh my God, why wasn't I going here all this time?" And I think that's the other thing is Atlas is not, there's plenty of incredible things halfway across the world, right? You can go in search of these far-flung wonders, but it's just as good to draw 100-mile radius around your house and say, I'm going to take exploring this area seriously. I'm going to find stuff that seems interesting, and I'm going to make a point of going and checking it out. And that is an incredibly satisfying experience, and often yields just as much of a sense of delight and discovery and wonder as some big trip around the world. And in fact, then you're also it's close to home, so you can go back there and do it again sometime. So I just think that it's an under thing that I think COVID maybe helped people discover, is that you can really just set an intention to explore the place you already live and feel that sense of surprise and delight that you do as a traveler.
My other half asked to ask you the question based on Gastro Obscura because she loves that book because she's a baker and cooks. And she said, "Have you got a favorite food memory?"
Hmm. I I have a kind of a I don't know if it's favorite's maybe not the wrong word, but I have a weird sort of relationship with lutefisk, which is a Scandinavian dish, but I grew up in Minnesota, which is a very Scandinavian place. And honestly, it's not so different from that urine preserved skate fish. It is basically cod that is then that is caught, soaked, dried, and then soaked in lye, at which point it is deadly to eat, highly
Yeah.
poisonous. And then you wash all the lye, you rinse all the lye out, and you end up with this kind of disgusting fish jelly. And it's just it's sort of a part of my cultural heritage. It's a thing that is eaten in my region of the United States. It's something that most people have never heard of. I have a real soft spot for that. I wouldn't call it something I particularly like, but I do sort of have a fondness for it in a way. In terms of things I actually like, I mean, there's lots of food stuff that I really enjoy. And I think what's interesting is because of the kind of internet and the fact that you can get anything from anywhere. Yeah, people's food tastes have just broadened out enormously. I mean, you used to say something like gochujang to people and they'd be like, "Oh, I've never what the hell are you talking about?" But now it's like this is a South Korean sort of spice paste that lots of people just have in their pantry. And so there's stuff like that that's not so weird. That's just kind of normal, but has to do with the broadening of kind of cultural horizons around food. I got this. There's something that I think is a little less common that I really love, and I'm trying to remember what its proper name is. But it's a Russian thing. It's an Eastern European thing, and it's pine cones preserved in honey. It's basically little green pine cones plucked when they're still quite soft and just really dropped in honey and kind of left to ferment or I guess not, they're not fermenting, they're preserving in there. And you end up with this syrup. Sorry, I said honey. It's not honey, it's just sugar. It's just pine cones and sugar and maybe a little bit of water, but they probably actually the water and the pine cones themselves, I think, just ultimately turns into this sweet pine cone syrup. And it tastes like you're eating a pine tree. It tastes like you're eating a Christmas. And so it's like great on ice cream. It's just got a really distinct taste, unlike much else. So I really like that. I'm a pretty adventurous eater. I will try most things. And so I'm always interested in sort of, yes, trying something new.
So, are there any standout moments from the show and of collating the books?
I mean, on the show, I have to say one of the real joys of it has been getting just to talk to people who I think are brilliant, like so much smarter than I am, have done some area of research like that is fascinating to me. So I really enjoy the process of getting to talk to people I admire. I had a conversation with Susan Orlean, the writer, the other day, and she was delightful. There's a writer named Mary Roach who we've had on the show a couple of times, who I just is one of the funniest people I've ever met. Yeah, that's my standout. My standout is having an excuse um, to talk to people who I just think are brilliant.
Mm. Dare I ask this next one of your top 5 experiences? That's a bit of a trouble for you, probably.
Top 5 experiences in my life?
Wow. Or top
I
5? Yeah.
I mean, I would have to say having my 2 kids and
Yeah.
getting married and all the boring stuff, but it is obviously deeply meaningful to me. So there's that. I mean, I think in the sort of Atlas Obscura world, this video shoot that I do called Small Town Big Story has taken me all over the country to some really interesting places. I went to this festival in West Virginia called Bridge Day, where once a day they open up this beautiful gorge to let people base jump off of it. And and I just got to meet all these people who were basically just like every one of them sort of was ready to die at any given moment. I mean, their recreation was something that the cost of being bad at it was death. And that was, I kind of loved it. I mean, they're one click farther into the whatever that mindset is than me, but I recognized it and I understood it. And I really sort of enjoyed spending time with these people because there's something when you're willing to live with death as the consequence for some kind of recreation, there's a sense of embracing life that I really respected. I understood. I could appreciate that. I other experience because honestly, the Eclipse Festival we just threw was a really great. I mean, it was 4 days, tons of music. Everyone was kind of staying on site, yeah, out in this small town in Arkansas. I'd never been to Arkansas. That was interesting. I That was really good. I have another one of these shoots coming up in Colorado where I'm gonna try and it's this bike race called the Iron Horse Bike Race. And so I'm gonna try and race an old steam train. I mean, not just me, a bunch of people do this. And you're like biking basically straight up a mountain trying to beat this steam train. It's 50 miles. I'm gonna die. I'm definitely gonna die. I'm not gonna complete it. But I mean, I sort of love that process too. I love the process of trying things I'm bad at and failing often in sort of embarrassing, slightly humorous ways. That there's a joy to be had there too. So I don't know. I don't know if I can. The best experience is the next one in a way. I love having new experiences and I love trying new things. And so the 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 thing that I really love is just that there's more out there to do. There's more to try. It's a corny, cliched answer, but I think it's real.
All the wonder in the world. That's what you're looking for.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Had to get that
Um,
one in.
yeah. Thanks, Marv. It's been really fun to chat with you.
Right. Very quickly then we'll go past the blah, 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 blah. General advice then on life, writing and podcasting then.
Oh man, no small questions. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I think I got really lucky. I think I found a horse to ride and I have been riding it. Again, all the advice here is comes with so many kind of cliches. I do think there is luck involved. I think there are plenty of talented people out there making incredible things that it's not aren't able to turn it into a profession or it's hard for them to find an audience to engage with their work and that's really can be really challenging. The thing is it doesn't make the work bad. Like not not being able to make a living out of it or not being able to find thousands of people, whatever, who it doesn't mean the work isn't good. The work is good. Like you are the only arbiter of whether the work is good or not. And honestly, there's plenty of stuff that's successful and the work is not good. It stinks. And I think I'm always trying to make the work better. We make stuff that I think is good.
Yeah.
Sometimes we make stuff that I think is just okay. And so that is a process that never ends. And I also think that finding success in any of those things, in writing and podcasting, whatever. The external success is sort of fleeting. Like it feels good and obviously being able to pay your bills is really nice. But then it's also still a job. The work is the thing that is not fleeting is trying to make something better than the last thing you made. That is the work of a life. Like that is the work that never goes away. And it's demanding and it's kind of punishing because the thing you're making is not quite as good as you want it to be. But that's okay. That is the work. That is the whole thing. And so in a weird way, I think that the best advice I can give is following that voice, like knowing that you are going to be the best arbiter of the work in some ways and holding yourself to just trying to improve it each time, regardless of how it's being received in the world, is the best way to approach it. Because Everything else kind of comes and goes, but that remains a kind of a true quest, I think, for any artistic person out there.
When you listen to podcasts yourself, what do you like to listen to?
What am I listening to these days? I'm listening to, you mean like specific shows?
Yeah, specific shows or genres that you like to listen to.
Oh, here's a good one. This is a wonderful show that's kind of new. It just started. It's called Never Post. It's a show about the internet. It's a mix of a chat show and a reported show. They do segments on things like what is the sound of the internet? What is the kind of musical genre that grew out of the kind of different technological eras of the internet? Or the purposeful use of what they call burnt toast audio, where you've overmaxed a microphone. And so it starts clipping and degrading. And the ways in which sort of doing that on purpose has become a real sort of shorthand for certain kinds of communication or culture. And so Never Post is a show I love. I listen to Search Engine, PJ Vode's new show, kind of very reply all-ish, really excellent show. I listen to some weird, I guess, real nerdy, a little bit niche shows. I listen to a show called Voices from DARPA,
Yeah.
which is a show put out by the DARPA agency and talks about some of the technologies that they are working on. It's wild. I mean, they're just the kind of stuff that is being worked on. And they have to talk about it in this weird kind of national security way where they like tell you some of it, but they can never quite tell you what they're doing or like what they want to use it for. And so that's sort of interesting in and of itself. I listen to a show called National Security Law Today sometimes that has done some really great multi-parters on sort of foreign affairs, security stuff. And then there's the classics. I'm still Freakonomics, Radio Lab. Those are great shows. Occasionally listen to a show called Odd Lots. It's a eccentric mix in there. There's a show called Econ 102 with a guy named Noah Smith that I listen to sometimes, talking about sort of the economies of different countries and what they mean for that country. And yep.
Wow, that's a full list for people to go and check out. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
where can people find you and get hold of you, Dylan?
I mean, Atlas Obscura is on all of the various social channels, and I am also on them at Dylan Thuras. Although, to be honest, I'm not a big checker, but you can get there. I eventually go and look at my Instagram, and I actually just got back on Facebook after being off for a few years because I had to do some work stuff there. But anyway, yeah, I'm there. Dylan at Dylan Thuras at most places, and certainly at Atlas Obscura is out there on all the channels.
Okay. Thank you for speaking with me today, Dylan. This was fun.
Thanks, Marv. Yeah, good to talk.
Right, you can find Pods Like Us on all streaming platforms, and we're on all the socials. Just look for Pods Like Us on Patreon as well, and you can contact us through podslikeus@gmail.com. But until next time, I hope you're listening again to another episode of Pods Like Us.